Welcome to the Pit Lane, a Formula One podcast where we talk about everything Formula One. In this week's episode, we will talk about F1 testing, which happened just last week in Bahrain, as well as our initial season prediction segment. I am your host, Jordan Wynn, and alongside me is my co-host, Alden Kwell. How you doing this week, Alden?
Having a great week, Jordan. How about yourself?
Good. Busy weekend with the family and stuff, but I'm ready to talk about some F1 after watching plenty of testing last week. What about you?
Yeah, 3 days of testing. There's a lot to talk about. We'll talk about cars, laps, drivers, orders, maybe even some small livery chat, but we did that last week. So yeah, I'm ready to get into it.
All right, we'll get into day one, session one right away. In Bahrain, it was a lot cooler this past week than normal. I think for American listeners, it was like 50 some degrees Fahrenheit, like 56, 57 for the first couple days. A little rain sprinkled in here and there as well. So it made for an interesting test just because this isn't normal conditions for any race that's ever been held in Bahrain. So useful data for that is kind of goes out the window a little bit. But yeah, interesting weather conditions. But I think day three was kind of more normal, a little bit warmer, a lot more sun with day three. But yeah, Bahrain was cooler this week, and we can get into the first session. The initial talks with kind of some of the announcers and stuff, they were talking a lot about what the flexi wings on the front wings, that is a rule change coming partway into the year. That their front wings can only it can only flex so much in during their, what do they call it, the trackside test or standard test. It won't be able to flex as much partway through the season, like starting race 9. So there's a lot of talk about that. There's a new tire this year. There's a C6 tire that Pirelli has added for this year. It's the softest tire in the range from C1 to C6, where last year was C1 to C5. There's also some updated timing graphics, if that's your cup of tea. To me, it just looks a little bit darker. But yeah, that's some of the main things they talked about initially.
Yeah, I think that new tire, the C6 tire, is going to be used for like some street circuits, specifically Monaco and probably a few others. So it'll be interesting to see where they end up selecting that. But it will almost certainly be used in Monaco. Yeah, the flexible wing stuff is a huge talking point still. Like you said, they're going to bring new testing forward to Barcelona, I think it is the first race where it's going to be implemented. So yeah, we'll see how that impacts teams who've taken advantage of it the most over the last year or so. McLaren is, I think people believe they've made the most use of it. So we'll see how that impacts their car or their aerodynamics. Just how that impacts a lot of the teams. Maybe there'll be a dark horse who ends up getting impacted quite a bit that we didn't know about. But yeah, I think that'll be nice to have just like a good a new rule set or a way forward that the teams all know, hey, this is how we're all going to be, sort of on a level playing field.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what happens with that once it's implemented, as you're saying. Obviously, Lewis Hamilton is in his new outfit, new Ferrari, officially for the first time, trackside with cameras and everything. So that was pretty cool to see. We technically have 5 rookies on the grid this year, depending on how you classify rookies. But we definitely have 5 rookies in their first F1 testing this year. So that made it a little bit interesting. Obviously, the first few sessions, there's a lot of aero rakes, a lot of sensors to get a lot of data. So you're not getting, just full car sets. It's, a lot of rakes and stuff on the car. And in that first session, we saw our first on-track battle with Hulk and Albon kind of going to turn 1 side by side. And Liam Lawson spun his car in his Red Bull. Well, it wouldn't be a season with Red Bull without somebody spinning. So Liam Lawson spun his Red Bull in the first session, but there's a lot of people going through the what do you call it? I can't think of the term, but
Motions?
yes, going through the motions and getting back into the car, especially Lawson in a new car. Yeah, so that was kind of the first session.
Yeah, it was also really windy the first and second day.
Yes.
So a couple cars were very twitchy during certain corners or under braking. Saw that during the highlights. It was just very clear to see the car, the drivers were battling with the wind all day. So not surprising to see that there were some jerks and some spins from Lawson and others, but no one was immune to it.
Yep. Yeah, like you said, the first two sessions that definitely happened. A lot of crosswind. A lot of people going wide. Some people went on the gravel. I should also mention the first day, everybody got into the car. Every driver did a half day's worth of work. Or I guess each driver was in a session. Whereas the last 2 days, there were a couple of drivers that did a full day's worth of tests. So not everybody did every day, but everybody did an equal number of sessions, if that makes sense. But yeah, another rookie, Isaac Hadger, spun his Red Bull, his Racing Bulls. Holy cow, this is going to be way too confusing. The new naming convention, but Isaac Hadger, Yuki Tsunoda's teammate, spun his in the second session. Is this your McLaren comment on here? Was that me?
No, I added that.
Yeah, okay. I was like, oh, I can remember to type that. McLaren applied their FlowViz on half of Lando's car for a lap with all the cameras. Everyone was able to see how this went for them. Who gained more information, the public or McLaren? Is this when they had like their human wall when it pulled into the pits?
Yeah, but like it didn't matter because the F1 cameras, everyone else's cameras. Like, I just feel like they clearly wanted to know something, and maybe because they're not first overall in the constructors battle from last year, that they have less, wind tunnel and various other means of testing their car during this season, that they needed to get as much information from this session as possible. So they applied the FlowViz to the entire half of one of their cars. You split it down the middle, side to side, and like one half was just completely covered in yellow FlowViz. And if you're Ferrari or McLaren, Ferrari or Mercedes or Red Bull, you're trying to gain as much information from that as McLaren is, if not more. McLaren understands the car, so like if you're Red Bull, you can maybe figure out, oh, that's how they do that, and just apply it to your own car. Like maybe, yeah, obviously you have a different concept going, but you can see what they're doing, right? Like it's not just like normal air where it's clear and you don't see how the aerodynamics are working on a car. So I don't know. It was just like an interesting thing. A lot of people are saying that McLaren, it was a very arrogant move by them to think that they could, or a very confident move by them to feel like they could get away with this, and not also like, do they gain as much as other people gain was ultimately the question. And I think some people felt that other people were gaining a lot more information from this than McLaren was.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I guess I didn't really think about that, but yeah, that makes sense. Especially with the limited wind tunnel time. I guess I didn't think about, oh yeah, it's another way of means of getting more information that way that's similar to wind tunnel. Obviously live data is better, but yeah, interesting. There's also a lot of weird red flags, I felt like, this testing, right? Do you agree? Go ahead.
Yeah, there definitely were. But this one on day one and the one on day three are very odd and specifically weird.
Yeah. So in the second session, there was a power outage with, I don't know, probably about an hour into the session, hour and 15 minutes in the session. There's a power outage basically at the whole circuit. Took about an hour to fix. Some of the garages went out initially, and the lights went out. Luckily, there was some daylight left at that time, so it wasn't like it was pitch black at the track and the drivers couldn't see. But yeah, there's a huge power outage at the circuit. I think just about everybody lost power, every garage and stuff. So yeah, that was interesting. And that was the first red flag of the the testing session.
Yeah, really weird. Probably had something to do with the wind. Who knows really what all went down, but definitely some funny images and videos on YouTube showing like mechanics working on cars with just flashlights.
Yeah.
They wasted no time to work, but they did end up adding on an hour worth of running at the end of the day. So mechanics and drivers and everyone had more work, but no one lost any time ultimately. Net.
Yeah, which is fair. Everybody's in the same boat, and they might as well give them that hour back. Another thing that was actually decided or signed off on is I think it was that day too, which is what made it interesting, that the FIA or F1 decided that the Monaco GP will have a forced 2-stop minimum now going forward, at least for this next year. You have to use at least 3 sets of tires and at least 2 sets of compounds. The 2 sets of compounds is standard, but you have to at least do 2 pit stops now. What are your thoughts on this?
Kind of felt like there was some momentum towards going to changing specifically Monaco. I think this is the least drastic change that they could have made. A lot of people were talking about turning the race into sort of like a time trial thing, awarding, not even having like a race, but just like a 2-day qualifying session. People were talking about making you do 2 stops with all 3 compounds for the weekend. Just forcing a second mandatory pit stop, I think, is the simplest change that they could have made. I don't know if I have an opinion. I guess I'm willing to see how this plays out over 1 or 2 seasons. But I guess it's better than just the one. So this will introduce a little bit more chance and whatnot. It's less racing chance and more, is your pit crew good? So I guess it's still taking away a little bit of the opportunity from the drivers, but ultimately the cars are still too large, and that's the real problem.
Yeah, I agree. I know you say you're taking the opportunity away from the drivers, but I kind of feel like it's already kind of taken away what you're saying with the cars being too large anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, I get that, qualifying is kind of the big show at Monaco now. But it would be nice to have a race that's a little bit more interesting. Obviously, last year, I don't want to say it's an anomaly, but last year with the early red flag, everybody changed tires right away, and basically nobody took a pit stop after that, which kind of made the race not a race at all, essentially. So yeah, I get the reaction to this. It'll be interesting to see. I hope they bring the C6 tire there and just use all the 3 softest compounds. So maybe they'll have to take a 2-stop anyways. But yeah, it'll be interesting what happens the next couple of years with it and if it makes a big difference or not. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see. Somebody made the point, I have it noted here, that if you're at the back of the pack, let's say you start dead last, and you stop lap 1, take a pit, change your tires, go again, stop lap 2, go again, and then you just pull up to the back of the pack if, the top few drivers are slowing the pack down, and all of a sudden you're at the back of the pack, you've already done your pit stops, all of a sudden you're kind of in the driver's seat, depending how things shake out. So, the strategy is going to be interesting coming up. This year, at least, to see what people do.
Yeah, there could be some interesting gamesmanship, some strategy things that I guess will at least give the strategist something to work on for that race. Like you said, this could be some interesting things. I'm interested to see how it plays out, and maybe they end up, going back to the way they did before, or maybe they continuously try and evolve the race. But we'll see. And this, just for the record, this is effective this year, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, right?
That's what I thought I remember hearing.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll just see what happens, I guess.
Cool.
Day one, total laps. Orlando did 52. Piastri did 66. Mercedes with Russell, Antonelli. Russell 70, Antonelli 48. Max Verstappen with Red Bull 74. Liam Lawson 58. Charles and Lewis 71-70. Carlos Sainz and Albon at Williams 68-63. Good mileage there. Gasly and Duhan at Alpine 72 and 68. Yuki and Hadjar for the Racing Bulls or VCarb 78-76. I think that's the second most totals for the day. Sauber, Nico Hulkenberg, and Bortoletto 55 and 59. Aston Martin had kind of a weird day with 46 and 42 laps with Alonso and Stroll, and Haas with Ocon doing a big 88, and Oliver Behrman with 72. So a lot of laps done in the first day. Aston Martin kind of didn't have a great first day, with lap times and stuff. They know they're in the garage a lot and whatnot, but yeah, more or less everything went relatively smoothly for most people. Nothing too crazy otherwise happened.
Aston Martin looked good while their car was out on the track. Like once they got some of the things sorted out, they didn't look terrible on the first day. I think they had some, not necessarily regression in the second session or the second day or the third day, but I remember hearing some talk about how they didn't look terrible on that first day. Haas with just a killer amount of laps on that first day, well over 150 for him. So a lot of good news there. I remember hearing Ocon talk specifically about trying to gain understanding with the team. He's in a new team this year. He's got a new race engineer, but so like they're learning about one another, how they like things, how they like to be spoken to, how, so like it's just a really crazy learning curve for everyone involved. So hopefully that pays dividends for them. So they get a good rapport and they know like when does the driver like to be, spoken to in terms of like timing in a corner during a braking zone on the straights, yada, yada. Obviously he's got to learn a new steering wheel, which I think is something that Hamilton talked about a lot as well in his time so far with Ferrari, was learning just all the various different locations for buttons and modes and how that all works. So this is a good, important session. The testing is real. It's really important. You're not just testing the car, but the driver's learning and the team is learning just as much as you are about each other as you are about the car.
Yeah. And I know another side note on that. I saw a note where like Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari, they, adjusted Lewis Hamilton's steering wheel, like had put the shifters in a little bit different position compared to, where Carlos used to have them or where Charles has them. So, everybody's adapting to each other and, getting used to the teams, as you're saying, and kind of going, everybody's adjusting to each other, getting more familiar. And when you only have 3 days worth of testing, where in the past you'd have more, you got to get up to speed a little bit quicker and, build those relationships a little bit faster as well, so with your race engineers and all that. Day two, we had another cool day, a little rain in the first session. It was interesting that only Haas and Aston Martin were the ones that brought a set of inters to Bahrain. Usually when teams do this, they kind of just fit them on the car to make sure that, that their floor doesn't rub up against it, because usually they're a little bit thicker or a little bit wider tire. But yeah, Haas and Aston Martin were the only ones with inters. I know that, was it Lance Stroll that was in the morning session, I think? Went out on a set of inters for a couple laps. And the Haas also briefly went out. Or maybe it was Haas that only went out. Either way, Haas went out on a set of inters as well. I don't know if they got any real useful information on there, only doing a lap or two. So, but yeah, they were out there in Bahrain on inters, and that doesn't usually happen, especially in the regular season.
Yeah, that was a really weird sight. I mean, it wasn't like it was downpouring by any means, but the track was definitely wet, and it just looked weird. So I don't know how much information was really gained. Maybe the drivers were able to sort of like get some understanding about low grip situations, just because that surface is really abrasive. I don't know how that changes when it's wet, but yeah, I think that was what Ocon that went out on the inters, so he probably gained the most information on it. But whether that's going to be applicable to anything going forward, is, difficult to tell.
Yeah, and it didn't really seem like it affected teams that much in terms of their testing purposes and how many laps they did kind of in that session. Yeah, there's a little bit of rain, but it didn't last. It was kind of more spitting, and it didn't last that long, and it dried up relatively quickly too. So, yeah. And then also, so go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, it's clear from the lap counts that we have here that there were certain drivers that were impacted by it a little bit more than others because they obviously weren't able to go out. Just looking at Lewis, he only had 45 laps. Day 2, Oscar Piastri only had 44. Someone else, Pierre Gasly, only had 40. So definitely a limited time. And I think Lewis was perhaps maybe the only person that made a comment about how it impacted their testing program. But I think he made that comment on day 3 that they didn't quite get to everything that they wanted. So whether that was really as a direct result of the wet session on day 2 or just an overall comment about everything that they wanted to do, it definitely did impact the team somewhat, but maybe not all of them to the same effect.
Yeah, it didn't feel too extreme, but yeah, I think you're right. There's also a small collision between Hulk and Piastri in that session, kind of wheel to wheel. I can't remember what turn it was, but it was getting closer to that. It was kind of that infield area before that double left-hander into that braking zone. It was before that. It was after the little S section. If that makes sense. Hulk was, I think he knew Piastri was coming, so went wide a little bit, but then just still kind of stayed around and turned in. And him and Piastri ended up bumping just a tiny bit, where Piastri had to kind of cut the corner a little bit. It wasn't as wide, and then he had to come in and didn't have the right angle. I don't know. They tapped a little bit. Both came in immediately afterwards. Checked for damage. Ultimately, nothing came of it. And yeah, just a little bit of contact. But yeah, and that was kind of mostly it for that day, right? I don't think there's a whole lot other than the weather and that little bit of contact.
Yeah, relatively uneventful day aside from those two things that we talked about. Seemed like just some genuine confusion between Oscar and Nico in that little coming together. I don't think there was any real damage to either car from what I saw. But, I guess both of them learned that their cars were a little bit more durable than they thought.
Yeah. Let's get into some laps here. McLaren, Lando did 77. Oscar, like you mentioned, did 44. In that morning session. Russell did 70. Kimi Antonelli did a solid 87 in his second day in the Mercedes. Liam Lawson had the whole day. At day 2, he did 91 laps. I know that as of late, the last few years, Max has kind of gotten day 3 all to himself, and the same as for this year. Ferrari, Charles Leclerc did 83. Lewis Hamilton in that morning did 45. Carlos Sainz in the Williams had the whole day to himself, did a whopping 126. And if you're wondering, that's more than 2 full race distances in Bahrain. I believe a full race is 57 laps, if my memory serves. So yeah, more than 2 full GPs there. Gasly did 40 in the morning. Jack Doohan did 79 in the Alpine. Yuki Tsunoda did 46. His teammate Hadjar did 94 in one session. That was pretty impressive for a rookie, especially. Nico Hulkenberg did 56. Gabriel Bortoleto did a solid 80 as a rookie. Alonso 45. Stroll 57 in the Astons. And Esteban Ocon did 69 in that morning session. And Oliver Behrman with a solid 66. So another solid day for Haas there.
Yeah, absolutely. Notably, the quickest lap time of the entire testing, 3 days of testing, was set by Carlos Sainz on day 2.
On the C3?
On the C3, yeah. So I don't know if there's really anything to take from that other than maybe that was like the perfect condition for that tire at that time for that car and the fuel loads. Like, we don't know anything about fuel loads or engine modes. So, I think the top four all had lap times within like half a second of one another. Um, really difficult to know what that really means, but these lap times are really impressive. Carlos Sainz with 126. The reliability from these cars this testing season was honestly very impressive. I think that might be one of our biggest takeaways from everything is that we're just seeing that like not a lot of teams are spending their time in the garage scratching their heads figuring out what's wrong with their car or even just like having breakdowns or issues with anything. It was just a lot of people getting on with it.
Yeah, it does help that it's been like the third season of the engine freeze or something like that. So yeah, reliability should be pretty good, but yeah, it's still impressive that these cars are getting these amount of laps in with, minimal issues. And yeah, it is really impressive. Day 3, probably the most normal, no, I guess that's not true. The most normal weather day. I was going to say most normal day for a test, but with the red flags that came out, it wasn't quite that. The first session, there was a red flag for the checkered flag stand or something had a glass explode onto the main straight. But I think it was determined that like it was a rock or something from Behrman's car.
Yeah.
Does that sound right?
Yep. I think that's exactly what happened. But
Yeah.
there was glass on the circuit, so they had to
Sweep that
bring
up.
out the red flag. Yeah.
Super random thing that happened.
Not as random as the next thing.
Not as random as the next thing. There was a bus on the track. Was it the first session or second session?
I think it was during the daytime, so I think it was the first session.
Yeah, so there's a bus on the track, and I think a marshal was like late to their post or something, or I don't know, the bus took a wrong turn onto the track, and all of a sudden they weren't on the track, they were on the runoff.
Yeah.
Like service road, but it's within the bounds of the track walls. So
circuit.
Yeah. So they had to throw a red flag for that as well.
No, it was really weird looking seeing. I didn't think that's what Formula One cars look like these days, but turns out it was a legit bus. And the videos are pretty funny. So if you haven't seen it, it's a good one.
Yeah, it's something else, not something you normally see.
Yeah, very weird. Two very weird red flags.
And we also had a Haas engine cover rip open. I think Oliver Behrman was on track at the time. And essentially, some of the cooling, where the air flows into the cooling, it ripped the engine cover off, essentially, like blew it open. It doesn't look like it exploded, but like kind of in that way. I don't know. It's hard. It's like it peeled off almost. What it looked like afterwards, the aftermath. But yeah, this also happened to them during their shakedown. Not quite in the same manner, but yeah, kind of very similar circumstance. So I don't know if it's an issue with like their manufacturer with their bodywork or something, because it seems really odd that this happened twice to them so far, and it's been they've only ran their car a handful of times on track, so probably something they need to figure out.
I think the comments from the team after the session was that they believe it's the fasteners, which they tried to save weight on this year. So they'll probably be able to fix that before the first race of the season, but it's definitely going to have to be something that they spend some time and energy on.
Yeah, just another interesting thing for them. And Red Bull came with a new nose, a new front wing for day 3. I don't know if they were just testing stuff out or what it was, or if it was maybe one of the stiffer wings for when the new regulations come in with the stiffness test for the flexi wings we kind of mentioned earlier. But yeah, we'll see what comes of that. But yeah, not a lot happening. There were probably a few glory runs, but nothing too crazy. Day 3 again, just I don't know. It felt like kind of a mundane testing, but yeah, day 3, here's kind of our lap totals. McLaren with Lando with 57, Piastri 84, Russell with a whopping 91 in one session, and Antonelli with 61. Red Bull, Max only put 81 on the car, so probably kind of a down day for them. Charles Leclerc with 66 and Lewis Hamilton 47. Albon was in the car all day with a whopping 136. That's
That's
insane.
insane.
Yeah, that's crazy. Pierre Gasly with an 83, Duhan 61 on the Alpine. Racing Bulls, Yuki Tsunoda 87, Isaac Hadjar 76, Hulkenberg in the Kicksauber 69, Gabriel Bortoletto only 38, Alonso 82, Lance Stroll 34 in the Aston, and Ocon with another solid session with 102, and Behrman with 59.
Yeah, of note, I think Lance Stroll was sick overnight between the second and the third day. He tried to get through the third day with doing some running, but just like couldn't make it. So Alonso ended up doing a little bit more of the running on day 3 than I think they were expecting, just because Stroll was not feeling well.
Yeah. Yep. Total lap times for the testing sessions, Mercedes had 458. Huge number there. Haas 457, one behind. Racing Bulls or VCARB 454. Also solid Alpine with a 405. Note there, they're the only ones with that engine, so they got to get the miles on there. Williams with a 395. Ferrari 382. McLaren 381. Kicksauber 354, Aston Martin 306, and Red Bull with only 300. I say only, but 304 laps. So with what, like a third of the data of maybe Mercedes and Haas and Racing Bulls. So probably not the test they were hoping for, but I'm sure they got quite a bit of information anyways.
I mean, Mercedes did 50% more laps than Red Bull and Aston Martin. That's a stark difference.
Yeah. It's also really impressive. Yeah, huge numbers for them. Fastest times for each team. As we mentioned, Carlos Sainz had the fastest time of the testing overall with a 129.348. Ferrari 129.376 or 79 with Lewis Hamilton. Mercedes, George Russell 129.545. Red Bull 129.566 with Max.
And that top 4, hearing that now, that there's just a hair over 0.2 difference between those top teams in the timings there. Like, that's a very condensed field, it feels like.
Yeah, for sure. And that doesn't even include the McLaren.
Right. Not that we're saying that Williams is the fastest car. It's just that gap between them is noticeable.
Piastri with a 129.940. Gasly in the Alpine with a 130.040. Lance Stroll with a 130.229. Who was in the VCARB? It was Yuki with a 130.497. Haas 137.28 with Ocon. And that Kicksauber with Bortoletto with a 131.057. I think most of those times were, some of them were day 2. A lot of those times were day 3. Team development between last year and this year. This is comparing best lap times and testing. I don't know how comparative it is, but Alpine knocked off 2 seconds from last year to this year in their testing.
Wow.
Notably, Alpine was very overweight last year, and that car was really bad out of the gates. Last year at least, and it seems like they picked off where they left off at the end of last year, which was kind of on the rise. Williams 1.6 seconds quicker than last year in testing. Red Bull 1.1 seconds quicker than last year in testing, and that's with the fastest car at the beginning of last year. McLaren 1.09 seconds quicker. Haas 0.958. McLaren 0.93, Mercedes 0.823, Ferrari 0.548, Sauber 0.41, and Racing Bulls 0.278. These are all quicker than last year's, and that's just their best times. But yeah, what are your takeaways from testing, if you have any?
Yeah, no, I think noticeably, it looks like the Alpine and the Williams are sort of like the 2 midfield teams this year, or ahead of the pack in the midfield, or the behind the top 4. I think the top 4 still looks pretty consistent to last year, which is Red Bull, McLaren, Mercedes, and Ferrari. I think everyone kind of is thinking that McLaren's the fastest. I think it's up for grabs as to whether Mercedes or Ferrari is the second fastest, but it looks like we'll have a good battle there, and that Red Bull's probably the fourth fastest team right now. They were doing a lot of, testing on day 3 that involved FlowViz and some various other things that seemed like they're still trying to get the full grasp and understanding of the car. So we'll see whether or not they can show up to Australia with a deeper understanding of the car. Maybe they'll be able to look through the data and see what worked and what didn't work. But yeah, Haas is also, not too far behind the Alpine and the Williams. I think on day 1, they set some of the slowest times during the whole 3 days. They had 135s out there. But they're probably doing just totally different kinds of testing with some slow tires and heavy fuel loads. Aston Martin definitely looks like they've regressed from last year, even though their fastest time was faster than last year. They just consistently, I think, for the full 3 days, and granted, Stroll was out for some of it. They look like they maybe have been leapfrogged by Williams and Alpine. But that Racing Bulls and the Sauber group definitely look to be the slowest.
Yeah, it looks like they're bringing up the rear, especially that Sauber. Just if any of the cars that doesn't really look good, it's kind of that one. Something to note with the Haas team, I know their team principal, he was interviewed and kind of mentioned that he kind of doesn't care about the 1 lap pace in the Haas right now. That might be indicative to kind of what you were talking about, how they're probably running, a lot of heavy fuel loads, a lot of setup work and stuff just to, get the work into the Haas. Let's try and figure out what works best for them, race pace and everything, tire management and all that stuff. But yeah, Ayuka Komatsu was just kind of like, oh yeah, why do I care about 1 lap pace right now when the race is what matters, essentially, is what he said. So I thought that was interesting.
That was the right comment to make, right? Because their Achilles heel over the last, 3, 4, 5, 6 years has been tire wear in the race. They just burn their tires way too quickly. So it seems like they did a better job of that last year, and that's going to be critical to them going forward, right? They got to get that under control. So why worry about your 1 lap pace when you really need to be worrying about whether or not you're overheating your tires over 20, 25, 30 lap stints? That's what's really going to be important for them.
Yep. There was a quote unquote innovation I did see, and it was the Sauber, State Kick Sauber's lug nuts with the LEDs on them. Did you see that?
No.
So their lug nuts had LED lights on them that basically showed the pit crew or whoever's tightening the tires when it was tight. So once it hit a certain, I'm sure, a pound of, whatever the correct tightness is, it would change color. So they would know if it was tight or not.
On the lug nuts?
Yes.
As opposed to on the
and maybe it was on the whatever, but it was all a part of it. So it would show if it was tightened or not.
Because I've seen that on the guns that they used to.
It wasn't
tighten.
on the gun.
Okay, wow. I had no idea that was even possible.
Let's see if I can pull it up here, but yeah.
That would be pretty cool. Especially at the night races, seeing a car roll away with LEDs lit up.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Sauber has LED lights on wheel covers, so mechanics know when the wheel is screwed on.
Okay, well, that's a big improvement for them from last year. So
you're right.
Hopefully it works out. I mean, not to besmirch them, but that's very innovative. That would help them just as much.
When they solve a problem, right?
Yeah.
Especially versus, I saw it and I was like, wait, what? But yeah, no, it's cool. And if they're allowed to use them and it works, that's great. And you're saying it's something useful and they fixed the problem, especially one that they had last year. Yeah. So see if people use it going forward. Predictions. Do you have a prediction order on this year? Well, we can just go team. I don't think we need to do, unless you want to go drivers who you think your world champion's going to be and all that. We can do that too.
Sure. Yeah. I think just I'll give what I think the fastest team is, and this is just up through the first 9 races because I think the new wing rules will impact some teams at the front the most. But right now, I think McLaren's the fastest car. I think they just have the best understanding of their car, and their car is the fastest. And in that combination, along with 2 very good drivers, you've got the best car. You're going to be scoring the most points going for it. Mercedes, I don't know if it was just the weather, but which the cooler weather does help them. They looked really solid, which I didn't expect. So it's kind of like right now, again, based on limited knowledge, I put them at probably number 2, with Ferrari number 3, with Red Bull 4th. And then honestly, like I think it's up for grabs between Alpine and Williams for 5th place. Alpine honestly looks really fast, especially Pierre Gasly. And no surprise, but their car looks great in the sun. Just a little livery chat there, but it does. It looks good. So I'd probably say Alpine 5th, Williams 6th, Haas and Aston Martin kind of maybe battling for 7th and 8th. And then Racing Bulls 9th and Sauber 10th. That would be my constructors rankings based on absolutely nothing and knowing absolutely nothing.
Yeah, I'm pretty close to that. I got McLaren 1. I think I want to just go with Ferrari 2, wishful thinking, probably more so than anything else.
Yeah, fair.
Mercedes 3, Red Bull 4. I think Williams, just because their driver lineup will make the difference, especially right away. If they're kind of pretty tight with Alpine, I think that can make the difference. So I'll have Williams there at 5, Alpine 6. I think I'll have Haas 7, Aston Martin 8, Racing Bulls, and Sauber to round out the last few places. If I had to pick a world champion today, I don't know, honestly. I want it to be Lando Norris, but I think somehow Piastri will get a lot of work done right away if he can find that 1 lap pace. I think he might surprise people this year. So that's my initial prediction.
Okay.
Long shot, but I like it.
I think you've got some solid reasoning there. I think if you ask me what I wanted, it's Lewis totally Hamilton championship. Yeah. So I want to say Lewis, but I think based on what I've seen, again, this is just honest. Okay, like I wouldn't put it past Max to have a great second half of the season, especially with the wing updates coming. I think that will severely impact McLaren's car the most.
The great unknown, man. But yeah.
It is right. It's unknown whether how big of an impact. They're changing the testing, so will they be able to sort of skirt under the radar? I don't know. Max is an incredible driver. He's determined. He's probably the most determined driver out there I've ever seen. So I don't think the car looks that good, but even when the car doesn't look good, Max still looks good.
Mm-hmm.
So. Well, I guess it'll really depend on how the 2 McLaren drivers, which are very even, how they split the points in the first 9 lap or the 9 races. Yeah, if you made me put money on it, I'd probably say Lando, with Max a close second.
Okay, yeah, I get.
But
that
I really
too.
want Lewis, just to be clear.
Yeah, I'm in your boat too. I would love to see Lewis break it with Ferrari and be the first Ferrari champion since Kimi Räikkönen, which is crazy to say out loud.
Almost 20 years ago.
I know. But yeah, I'm sure we can talk about maybe doing another prediction segment, maybe halfway through the year, or maybe after that first flexi wing race change. See what happens there. Let's see what else we got to talk about today.
No, I think my main takeaway is just that it feels, again, this is just based on what we saw over 3 days, feels like the field overall has condensed, that the top teams haven't miraculously pulled away, that the bottom teams haven't somehow regressed. right? Like Alpine has gained 2 seconds on their fastest lap time. Williams over a second and a half. Those two teams were, probably the two slowest last year out the gates. Sauber, honestly, they didn't perform well largely in the first half because they had some really bad pit stops. So I just really hope that the in-season development works in such a way where the field stays condensed and that no one kind of just runs away. I think early half of last season we saw what was a worrying sign of Max winning all the races in the beginning, and it ended up becoming very competitive as the season went on. So I just hope that that continues throughout the first, honestly, I guess for the whole season this year. It's a competitive, condensed field.
Yeah, that's the ideal situation. When, last year we had 8 drivers win races or something like that. 7 drivers win races. So we're hoping for something like that again for the 2025 season. But we hope that continues this year. And maybe you think we'll see after the first race in Australia. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been the Pit Lane Formula One podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Have a good one.